This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day, and that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian makes the team collaboration software that powers enterprise businesses around the world, including over 80% of the Fortune 500. With Atlassian's AI-powered software like Jira, Confluence, and Loom, you'll have more time to do the work that matters. In fact, Atlassian customers experience a 25% reduction in project duration per year. Unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Underrated Movie Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss films that are underrated, underappreciated, and ones that have flown under the radar and passed most people by. I am your host, Derick McDuff, and joining me today is a returning guest, Austin Olivia Kendrick. Welcome back, Austin. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. I'm back here with you to talk about one of my favorite movies, so I'm doing awesome. I'm excited to be here and excited to nerd out with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back. You're always one of my favorite people to have on. Love your passion for these movies. Thank you. But yeah, as you said, one of your favorite movies, and today we're going to be talking about Tick, Tick, Boom, which is the musical directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda, his directorial debut, actually, which came out back in 2021 on Netflix, written by Steven Levinson, based on the musical of the same name, is a semi-autobiographical account of the life of Johnathan Larson, of course, with Andrew Garfield starring as Larson himself. This is a movie that came out, did the rounds, did okay, got a little bit of awards recognition, but then I think kind of, as we alluded to in talking about this before, disappeared a little bit. But Austin, since this is such an important movie to you, since you brought it to my attention to talk about here, I wanted to give you the floor first and tell us why you chose this movie and what you love about it.
I mean, I think you touched on it where it's like this movie kind of came and went. I feel like there were moments of it, there were songs, there were dances that like went viral on TikTok for like a month or two, but then it just kind of faded away. And I was like, it's literally that joke of like everyone else moved on, but I'm still here. I'm still here sitting with this movie and past just, the songs are phenomenal, like the choreography, all of it, all the things that got picked up by the cultural zeitgeist are obviously interesting, and yet the actual impact of this film and the everything that it contains thematically, I'm like, how are we? No, don't just stay here. Come back. Please. There's so much here and it's such a. This is such a movie that was made by hardcore theater kids for hardcore theater kids. And I mean that in every sense of the word. I mean that from just how over the top and the actual directing and the editing is very flashy. It's very kind of like over the top. And I don't mean that with any sort of negative connotation. I mean in the way of like the scene where he's, in the swimming pool and he's finally everything is coming together and he literally looks down at the little marker at the bottom of the pool that says 30 feet and he wipes his hand over it and it turns into, a treble clef and he pushes his hand away from him and all of a sudden these music notes appear, at the bottom of the tiles of the pool. Like this is so theatrical. It is so sappy. It is so sentimental. It is that type of over the top that theater is. And from just that and the aesthetics of it, the theatrical aesthetics of it, to like things like, hey, so we're going to do a whole musical number that's just a reference to that's basically a reference to slash parody, not parody, but homage to Sunday in the Park with George. If you're unfamiliar with that, or you're unfamiliar with Stephen Sondheim, we're not going to explain this to you. We're not going to explain to you that we have like a million Broadway actors, including Bernadette Peters, who originated the lead female role in Sunday in the Park with George. If you don't already know that, sorry, this is going to go clean over your head. We're not going to stop and explain it. It's that esoteric, you kind of have to know a bit of the lore to really get it, to really get every little thing that is sprinkled in there. And that's it for me. The movie does that. It sprinkles in all of that love and all those details and all of that without the movie remaining inaccessible in its themes and with its question of really, what do you do with the time that you have? You don't know how much time you're given on this earth. What are you going to do with that time? That is the central question that's laid at Johnathan Larson's feet. And when you understand the tragedy going in at the very top of the movie, they say at the very top, hey, this is who Johnathan Larson was. This is why he's important. He's important in writing the insane cultural touchstone of Rent that fundamentally changed the face of the American musical and changed the cultural consciousness of like what a musical can sound like, what stories it can tell. It tells you at the beginning he doesn't live to see it. He literally died the night before the off-Broadway premiere. He was only 35 years old. And even though you're told that at the top, there's something about coming into it with the lived, not lived. I mean, Johnathan Larson died before I was born, and yet having interacted with his work and having seen the way that his his fingerprints have been left all over musical theater really since then, and how many people's lives that he touched and impacted, is going into this with that knowledge and with that understanding of the lived experience of being a theater kid. It is something where it makes it, I can't get through this movie without crying every single time. Every single time. I don't know if any of that was coherent, but
no. I think that was, I think that was very, very well put. And I understand. I related to a lot of what you're saying. I related to a lot of this movie, sometimes painfully so, because I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but I also was a theater kid. I did theater in high school. I was a theater major for a minute in college before I switched over to being English, and so I was pursuing being an actor before I decided to be a writer. So there was a lot in this where I was just like, I have known people that are Johnathan Larson that are like remind me of him a lot, and there's also aspects of him that, for better or worse, I saw myself. Particularly, he had that song which kind of opens about him turning 30 and feeling like he hasn't done anything, and working in this dead end job, and he just wants to be this great writer, and I was like, man, I can feel all of that. It's
so painful
deeply
to be seen that way. There's that line that he says of like, when he's talking about at the very beginning during 3090, he's in the, diner talking to his friends about like, there comes a point where you stop being a writer with a job waiting tables and you become a waiter with a hobby.
Oh, that hit.
It hits. And I think, again, being theater kids, if you couldn't tell by that opening ramble, I am also very much a theater kid at heart. I like you said, I grew up doing theater, musical theater. I still have such a love for it and a passion for it. I will always, for the rest of my life, deep down in my heart. And it's something where when you have that love and that passion for it, that it means the world to you. It means everything. People, rightfully so, theater kids, we can be a little dramatic. We can be a little over the top, but that's because everything feels so big, everything feels so important, that type of fire that's kind of sits in your body, and that passion, that creativity, and where the rubber of that meets the road of reality and having to be an adult and having to pay the bills and having to it's such a painful interaction that of that passion and those dreams meeting reality, and it's a painful interaction that you don't want to have to reckon with. It's a painful one that it can be not inherently painful. It can have the capacity to hold a lot of pain. It has the capacity to hold just as much, if not more, joy.
Mm.
And it's something that can be hard, like you were saying, like to be seen in that experience and, to be kind of not called out on it, for lack of a better word, the way this film does. Yeah, it's something where it's like, "Oh, I don't like being seen like this." Anyone who's pursued a creative endeavor, this film very much sees right is looking right at you, and you kinda wanna shrink, into your chair or into your couch as
Mm.
you're watching it.
Yeah, and because to your point, I think that this film does, for lack of a better term, show that sometimes theater people can be a little bit insufferable, and it's
Yeah, agreed,
I don't want
agreed.
I don't want any theater people to come at me because, like I said, I am myself a theater person.
Yes, lived experience, I am a theater kid, I acknowledge, with all the love in my heart, again, we can be a lot.
And they can be a lot. And this movie, Andrew Garfield does an incredible job at portraying that.
He was
Um,
robbed of the Oscar.
he's
That is what in my top 3 Oscar gripes is
mm,
Andrew Garfield should have won the Oscar for his performance as Johnathan Larson.
who won that year? Do you know? Or
Oh, it was the year of the Will Smith win and the Will Smith
oh,
slap.
okay,
Yeah.
that's
That's
even
that's
worse.
salt in the wound, man. That's
Yeah,
salt in the wound.
yeah. Because I was like covering some movie the other day, and I was like, "Oh, how did he not win?" I was like, "Okay, well, Daniel Day Lewis won that year," but like, no, okay, that's a horse of a different color. But
Yeah.
yeah, like that's really insulting.
Yeah, and it is, and it's something where the last time I was on here, we were talking about Walk the Line, Dewey Cox
Mm,
story, and we got into a really, really cool discussion that I appreciated about musical biopics, and
mm,
the biopics are the thing right now. There's always a new biopic coming out, and one of the things that we touched on in that discussion is I personally am deeply uninterested in a Wikipedia article biopic. And by
yes.
that I mean any sort of biopic that does not give me insight into this artist, into their experience, into their personalities, into their brains while they were creating the art that we are familiar with, that we, connect with. I want to be given a new lens through which to view this artist and to subsequently view their art. And this is one of those pieces that very much doesn't feel like a Wikipedia bio at all. It
Not at
very
all. Yeah.
much, especially because, Johnathan Larson himself, he it's kind of they worked backwards because he wrote Tick Tick Boom as it's presented in the movie as like this musical monologue of him,
Mm.
this crisis as he's coming upon his 30s. And then, after that he moved on to writing Rent, and then Rent got was being made into the production off Broadway. He passed. He never got to see any of the success of it, and so suddenly Jonathan and he was posthumously given the Pulitzer Prize for Rent. Like again, the cultural impact of that show was insane, and yet he's gone. There's nothing else
Mhm.
that he can't. There is no next Jonathan Larson musical, and so they went back to Tick Tick Boom and reworked it into a Broadway musical that like is loosely based on Jonathan Larson's life. Like, the main character is named John,
Yeah.
and that's just about, and so and then the movie kinda picks up on, like, where the musical left off and reworks it and refits it back into Jonathan Larson's actual life and experience. And even
Right.
at the very top where there's kind of that cheeky, like everything you're about to see is real except for the parts that Jonathan made up. And even the parts
Uh-huh.
that are made up that are quote unquote, even the parts that are quote unquote made up still give a lens into him as a person and the things that he prioritized and the things that he dealt with and his, artistic struggle. And God, Lin-Manuel Miranda loves a prolific visionary writer who feels like he's running out of time, doesn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's something where, again, it can be so hard to, especially once the subject of a biopic has, but he's been gone for 30 years at this point, to go back and to reopen that book and to put a new lens through which to view his life, and even just getting attention back onto Johnathan Larson's story and the tragedy and the joy and the impact that he had. I love this movie. Can you can you tell?
I think I just won my taxes.
Yeah?
I just switched to H&R Block in about 1 minute. All I had to do was drag and drop last year's return into H&R Block, and bam, my information is automatically there.
So I don't have to go digging around for all my old papers to switch?
Nope.
Sounds like we just leveled up our tax game.
Switching to H&R Block is easy. Just drag and drop your last return. It's better with Block.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, no, I picked up on that, but yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, comparing it to those other biopics, the ones that are like kind of more the music biopics, the by the numbers, Wikipedia article ones, which I think is a great term that I'm definitely going to steal in the future. And this one is not that at all. And I think to touch back on what I was saying before about, okay, it does kind of show that him as being a bit of a pretentious guy, and his whole attitude. And I think it also does a really good job of showing how that attitude affects his circle, the people around him, because he is he's aware of his privilege, but like not really. He's kind of like, and I think a big part of the movie is him kind of awakening to that privilege and seeing how best he can use it, and then writing Rent, which is a movie that, as you said, changed musical theater and really put a spotlight on people who do not have privilege, the people he saw in his life that were dying of AIDS and that were not able to afford basic necessities. And I think the character in this that really unlocks just the core message and meaning of the movie is the character of Michael, his best friend who they grew up together. They came to New York together, and Michael, quote unquote, sells out, whatever. He goes and works in advertising and stuff. And Johnathan is kind of seen as, the noble, doing the noble thing and pursuing his art and being the starving artist. But the movie does a good job of flipping that and being like, there's that scene between them where, Michael is a gay man of color, and he kind of basically yells at him, like, he's like, yeah, you can like afford to do that. You can like be flippant and like have this love of your life and all this stuff and all these things. I can't do that. And he's like, well, why not? Go do it. And he's like, are you kidding me, dude? You like, he's like, the love of my, this is the early 90s, I can't get the love of my life.
It's the AIDS crisis.
Yes, exactly.
Where
it's the AIDS crisis.
Gay men were being systematically failed by this entire country. They were being neglected and left to die. And even forgetting, gay marriage wasn't even legal on the federal level until 2015.
Yeah.
And it's something where I love that scene because, it is something where that idea of the starving artist, and you kind of have to, Johnathan has that point in the blow up fight he has with Susan, where he's like, everyone is miserable in New York, like this is where everyone is miserable. And he does this He is being unbelievably self-centered and not present for all of these people who are trying to show up for him, who are trying to support him, who are trying to love him, and he's doing so and trying to shield himself with this cloak of nobility, and I'm making art, and I'm doing and this very self-righteous thing, and that scene is so fundamental because it needs to be literally yelled in his face.
Because the first time when they're like going home on the subway, they get in that kind of big blow up, and Michael's been trying to, connect with him, and he's just like, "Oh, I don't have time." He's pushing him away. He's pushing his girlfriend away. He's pushing all these people away for his noble pursuits, right? And he realizes that he's like, "Oh, I don't have time." Tick tick boom, like the tick tick boom. And we know that Johnathan Larson does not live that long, in retrospect, but really he's ignoring the fact that not completely ignoring, because he does bring it up, but he's like, "Oh yeah, I don't have this time." But it's like he doesn't have the same pressures put on him as these funerals that he's going to. He's like saying that of the however many funerals he's been to, the oldest person that he was with went to was 27, and they literally do not have time. Michael is fine when Michael finally tells him that I'm HIV positive. I've maybe got a year if I'm lucky,
Yeah.
That is such an impactful scene. And he's like, "Why didn't you tell me?" And he's like, "You tried."
You tried.
That is the scene that really just hits home. And oh my God. And, for me, like being, I was around 30 when this came out. And now I'm 35, so I'm just like, I'm the same. It's the same thing that, he's going through watching the movie. It's like, wow, he's the same age as when he died as I am now. And I'm proud of a lot of what I've done, but I would really like to have done more in a lot of ways. And it's one of those things, you compare yourself to other people, where he compared himself to Stephen Sondheim,
Yeah.
and it's
John
impossible.
Lennon, Paul McCartney,
Mhm.
like these impossible to achieve these very much outliers in existence. There aren't many John Lennons or Paul McCartneys or Stephen Sondheims, and there's this scene, where in the beginning when he's throwing this party, that he can't afford to throw, and there's that finance bro that shows up and he asks him like what he does, and Jonathan sarcastically yells in his face like, "I'm the future of musical theater, Scott." And the insane thing is that he was right. And but the thing is that he didn't know that in the moment. None of that was guaranteed.
Mhm.
He never even got to see it. He went out of this life thinking that he never achieved anything. He never got to see any of it. And it it's just insane to I don't even know like the layers of dramatic irony to that of you as an audience member to like know that like he's saying it just to like just to be sarcastic to this fucking finance bro who's annoying the hell out of him and being like, "Oh no, but you are." And again, he doesn't know that. And there's something about holding space for, again, yes, in the years to come, in 5 years from this moment that we see Jonathan as portrayed in this movie, he will have fundamentally changed the face of musical theater forever. And in this moment, he is still somebody who is, again, pursuing this art to this, degree of intensity that makes him self-righteous and somewhat obnoxious and that pushes people away, that isolates himself from reality. He doesn't want to Michael, all the bills of like, hey, at the very beginning, he's like, "Hey, you haven't paid this power bill. Are you gonna do that?" And he just grabs it and like kind of like tosses it over his shoulder of like, "Ah, don't worry about it. I'll deal with it." He doesn't want to acknowledge these things, these very real things that you have to deal with as an adult. He wants to bury his head in the sand. And then suddenly, later in the movie, when his power gets turned off, he's like, "What do you mean? Why wouldn't you call me? Why wouldn't you?" And it's like, I appreciate that this movie doesn't, they let him be a bit of an asshole. They let
Mhm.
him be self-centered. They don't handle him with these, "Oh my goodness, he's such a visionary and we can't," like, he was still a person. He was still a flawed person. Jonathan Larson was a visionary artist who, again, changed the face of musical theater, and he was still a flawed person that made mistakes that hurt people in his life, that, neglected relationships, and none of that. And he also, by the end of the movie, kind of recenters himself, and comes back to, like you said, that pivotal scene with Michael, where Michael, reveals that he's HIV positive, and literally Jonathan's been theoretically being like, "Oh, I don't know, I'm running out of time. I'm running out of time," to be faced with someone he loves so much being like, "No, I actually know how much time I have left, and it's not much. I have a year, maybe."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of the bucket of ice water that's thrown over his head that kind of shocks him back to, he's been fighting with this question of, do I stick with this pursuit? Do I stick with this art, with this wanting to say something about the world, wanting to change what art can be, about changing the landscape of Broadway into something that could be substantial, and to change it and make it an avenue through which to not only incorporate other types of music and the theatrical pop that rose in the 80s, and rock, and these different influences, but also open itself up to different forms of storytelling and what stories can be told. Do I pursue that? Do I commit my life to that? Do I commit my life to that and sacrifice things like having a dog, kids, wife, a mortgage, stability, a not shitty apartment, an apartment with heating, an apartment with a doorman, an apartment, all these things that Michael gets, when he takes the job in advertising. And there's that scene where Jonathan drives him to, they drive to the new apartment, and he's just like, "What the hell?" He sees a glimpse of the life that could be, should he decide to step away from that pursuit and that nobility. And he's been wrestling with that question, and you feel the tension build and build and build and build and build and build. And with the release comes when he's confronted with that news with Michael, and he literally runs, the way that he's been running from answering that question the entire time of facing reality, of facing the cost of what his dreams were going to take. He runs just as he has been doing the entire film, and then it's just him and the piano, and coming back to those core memories, those first memories of experiencing, being a part of theater and being part of that storytelling, and deciding, I'm gonna spend my time this way. I decide right there as a kid, that whatever time I have, I'm gonna spend it doing this, and recentering himself with that. And you have the lived experience of being a theater kid, so you know exactly what that moment that he's talking about. You
Yeah.
know it. You've been
Yes.
there.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, over the course of the film, he does kind of have that question of that, I think comes up in a lot of Damien Chazelle movies, of like, what is the cost of greatness?
Yeah.
What do we have to sacrifice to do something that is truly great, to be a truly profound individual who makes an impact in the world? And I think throughout a lot of the movie, you see, like, as you said, you see him kind of making these personal sacrifices and stuff. And you also see, though, that he, throughout the course of the movie, equates success in his pursuit, in his art, with financial success, right? He kind of thinks like, if I'm going to make it, and I'm gonna like be this next, quote unquote Stephen Sondheim, because he is someone successful who has made all these great things. So I want to be him. Stephen Sondheim, played brilliantly, by the way, in this by Bradley Whitwer.
Bradley Whitford, I'm so sorry we didn't get you an Academy Award nomination for your portrayal of Stephen Sondheim in this movie. It was excellent. It was
So good.
excellent.
But he kind of like goes on this journey where he realizes over the course of film that it's like, just because it's successful doesn't mean it's bad, and just because it's unsuccessful doesn't mean it's good. And because he kind of is like, I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep working on like putting my head to the grindstone and cutting everything out and making this incredible piece of art that I've been working on for 8 years. And then once it's released, I will have all of my wildest dreams come true. I won't need to sell it. I won't need to do anything. And then he makes it. He he gets the admiration of his peers, of his, mentor that of Sondheim, of like everyone around him kind of is like, wow, this thing is great. And yet it's not, it's like, yeah, there's not a place for this. It's not because it's not good. It's not because
Mhm.
the work you did was wrong. It's just because it didn't fit into whatever thing.
Yeah.
And he kind of has to recontextualize the way he thinks about art and success and stuff. And that's why I think it's so poetic and tragic at the same time that, yeah, he did have ultimately, create this incredible moving piece of art that changed musical theater, but it never gave him any personal
Yeah.
success. He passed away before that. And I think that is so important because obviously you want to have both, right? You want to be able to be Stephen Sondheim and have a long, great life and create all this
Yeah.
incredible art and stuff like that. But a lot of great art either doesn't get recognized in its time. You think of like Van Gogh or something, it's just like all these incredible artworks get overlooked, or it just doesn't get seen by people. And that doesn't mean it's not great art. I love the moment at the beginning when he's kind of like introducing the other players and stuff, and he's talking about his girlfriend Susan. It's like, she had this moment where it seemed like her career was going to like rocket and take off, and that she had an injury, and then when she came back, it was just the moment was past, right? And she was still doing great art after that, but the moment wasn't there. And she's like, it's fine with her because she realizes that what she's doing is just as special, whether it's in front of 1,000 people or in front of 2 people. She's still
Yeah.
making something great. And I think that is an important lesson that this movie is trying to portray and trying to tell you through the real life of Johnathan Larson and what he went through.
And I think one of the things about this film, again, I said in the beginning how this film hits harder when you know about the kind of on the nose poetic tragedy of Johnathan Larson. He died the night before the off Broadway premiere of Rent. The night before. It feels so on the nose. And yet that fundamental question of what it means to be great and the way we choose to spend our time, the way that what we seek to achieve and what gives us purpose, what gives us meaning, what do we do with this time? It
Mhm.
transcends Johnathan Larson as a person, as a cultural figure. It's something that anybody who pursues any sort of creative endeavor, who has ever wanted to, has had to wrestle with. And so, that's what I mean when I say that this film doesn't it isn't inaccessible to those who aren't familiar with the canon of musical theater and where Johnathan Larson stands in it. It's a fundamental question that millions upon millions upon millions of people across centuries have had to wrestle with. How do you spend your time? What is greatness? What does it mean to be great and make art that changes the world? It's all of that big question is distilled down to one figure in this movie. And it's a hard enough question to reckon with. It's even more of a gut punch when you have to reckon with it with a figure that, again, that's just that poetic. He died the night before the
So just,
off-Broadway. He never even got to see the rave reviews of the off-Broadway production.
mhm.
And knowing that all the rest of the world, everyone else in the world got to see it except for him. And it's a question I cannot answer of I mentioned earlier that Lin-Manuel Miranda loves if those are they're okay, I can't even make the joke of those who are unfamiliar with Lin-Manuel Miranda's other work, Hamilton. Everyone knows about Hamilton. That question of at the core of Hamilton is very similar to the one here, is what does a legacy mean? And what does it mean to spend so much of your life planting the seeds of a garden you never get to see?
Yeah.
Of spending so much of your time focused on a legacy that you miss out on how much of your own life do you miss out on? And whether or not that is worth it. And I can't answer that question. I don't think there is an answer to that question. I think it comes down to each individual person. But there's
Yeah.
something so tragic in this context of Johnathan Larson specifically, again, and all of that distilled down in this one person that is the core of this film. Of, did he go out of this lifetime feeling like it was worth it, even not knowing the Pulitzers and the Tonys and the cultural seismic impact that his work had.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I can't answer that question. No one can, and yet you're left to sit with it. And it's a tough one to be faced with. It's a tough one to sit with. Again, I can't get through this movie without crying because I I pursue a creative, endeavor to a degree. I'm a dialogue editor. I work in post-production sound. Not really the most glamorous or, life-changing art form. And
A
yet
noble pursuit, nevertheless, though, I would say.
God bless you. And yet there's something about the question you talked about, Johnathan Larson, about the lens through which he views great art. There's that
Mm.
moment in the word has escaped me right now, but he's doing that little testing room where they're coming up with the customer.
Oh, yeah, like
In
the workshop or whatever, or not the workshop, but
Yes.
the focus group. That's what it was.
Yeah, where he's like, "I'm good at this.
Mm.
This could be the rest of my life."
That's me every time I see a copywriter opening the
Yeah.
job.
It's something where it's like, I have these skills. I know for a fact that I'm good at this thing, and using those skills to do this hollow, empty marketing, okay, we need to come up with a name for a fat substitute for, that the customer is gonna love,
Mhm.
is that enough to know? Like, is putting those skills to use towards something that feels very hollow and empty, is that gonna be enough? Or do you have this creative cup that needs to be filled? I always say, when it comes to sound and when it comes to really any creative endeavor, if you have to if you're gonna pursue anything creative, you have to love it to the point where when it is a career,
Mhm.
you're still gonna be able to love it. You're not gonna grow to resent it. Theoretically, in that moment, he could decide to use his skills. He still technically would be using what he's good at to get exactly what he wants. In that moment, when he's looking at the camera going, "This could be the rest of my life. I could be using these skills, and I could kinda get the best of both worlds. I could technically be writing music and still be scratching that itch and then still be making that money that I'm so desperately, out of." And yet, there's comes this moment where he realizes, and it wouldn't fill that creative cup. It would not. I would feel so empty and so hollow, even though I'm using the same muscles that I am using to create to pursue this art that I think is meaningful and should have impact, in the world. It's creativity in the capitalist system we live under.
Yeah, it's that scene really resonated with me. Like I said, that's how I feel every time I get like an email from Indeed, and it's just like, hey, we've got these, you want to work at whatever Boot Barn or something as a copywriter, and I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I would much rather be writing, about things that I'm passionate about, that I care about, even if it's not going to make me, whether that be fiction or nonfiction, whether it's so that deeply resonated with me, and it made me, and I think it's a struggle that so many creative people go through, where it's like, yeah, you could use those creative juices to do so. You don't have to completely just go in the other direction. You don't work in a job that has nothing to do with what you care about. You don't have to join sales or just something if that's not something that's passion to. You can kind of meet halfway, but it's not going to, as you put it, fill that creative cup, and that's the part of the movie that hit the most for me. And I think I am kind of, when I first saw this, it didn't hit as much for me, but rewatching it this time, talking about it with you here now, it's really, really recapturing my passion. And I've been thinking about this whole time, why did this movie not have A, more of a moment, and then B, kind of disappear? And I think it's a couple things. One thing that I think we've alluded to already was the whole Lin-Manuel Miranda of it, which obviously, who doesn't love Lin-Manuel Miranda? But I think this movie comes out in 2021. I think that's a time when both kind of the general public and musical fans and also, I guess, the like voting bodies like the Academy and stuff were so oversaturated by Lin-Manuel
Yeah.
Miranda. Good stuff, but it was like that was the point when like Hamilton was really at the peak of its craze. It had just been
Mhm.
recording of it had been released on Disney Plus. Moana
Mhm.
was still really huge, and then he did a song. Into Heights had just come out, the movie version, and then you also have he had done music for a couple things that were out in theaters, including Encanto,
Oh.
which was everywhere. Like the
Mhm.
music for that was everywhere. So I think people were just like, all right, we're giving so much space to Lin-Manuel that we're gonna put more space into Hamilton or into Encanto than into Tick Tick Boom. I don't know. Would you agree with any of
Mhm.
that?
I mean, I definitely think it was something where the cultural tide, like you were talking about, the oversaturation, there was an exhaustion of Lin-Manuel Miranda stuff, and that's no commentary on he is brilliant at what he
Hmm.
does. But it was something where, again, you just kind of couldn't escape him. And
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you that we were in the point in the cultural cycle of, there's the kind of discovering him and him kind of breaking into the cultural mainstream and everyone's obsessed with him. Oh my God. And then there's the oversaturation and it kind of comes over the other side of the hump of like, oh my God, I'm so okay. It's too much. I'm so sick of him. I'm so sick of seeing his face. I'm so sick of hearing his voice. People talking about the Lin-Manuel Mirandification of music, and so many people trying to capitalize on that moment of everyone being so excited by Lin-Manuel Miranda's approach and his music and his impact that they're trying to mimic him to try to capitalize off of that. And I think that definitely contributed. And that being said, this doesn't feature any of his music or lyrics or anything. This is his directorial debut, and I'll say he did a damn good job.
Hmm.
Again, he has a very theatrical style. There's not a lot of stillness with the camera. There's very little stillness in the actors' movements. That everyone's kind of always there's always something moving.
And yet too, it does a lot of stuff that would be impossible in a play, which I think is very
Mhm.
impressive. Like, because this is obviously kind of based on a play, and Lin Manuel is a guy who comes from the theater. Yet it's
Mhm.
like, and a lot of times you'll watch these movies that are based on plays, you'll be like, okay, I get it. It was clearly based on a play. Like I just watched Dial
Yeah.
M for Murder. I'm like, I get it. This is all like in one location. You're not doing a lot of stuff. That's fine. But this one, like, if I hadn't known that it was based on a play. Like, you mentioned like the swimming, and then he brushes out, and like that's shit you can only do in a movie. And I
Yeah.
appreciate that he really made the medium work for the story he was telling.
Yeah, he was able to adapt through, it's just different forms of there are it's different forms of storytelling. There's
Hmm.
elements of film that as a visual medium that just simply aren't available in the theatrical space. And at the same time, there's things in the theatrical space that you can't access, in movies.
Hmm.
And especially when it comes to performances as well. Performance and there's theater acting and film acting and the way that, those things are approached, with theater, everything, I mentioned at the beginning that theater is over the top, but it has to be because when you think about it practically, when you're in a theater and there are hundreds of people, you have to make sure that your storytelling is able to project all the way back to the very back row so the people sitting
Hmm.
there can still pick up on and understand what is happening and be impacted by it versus film is something that can get 2 inches close to someone's face. You can see the slightest little adjustments in their face. You can see the tiniest little movement, the tiniest little whisper. And I thought that he did a great job of splitting the difference of keeping that big, brash, over the top nature of theater that we love so much, while also not making it feel like an incoherent, incohesive film. It registered. He found a way to split the difference in a way that hats off to him.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, and I also I do think that one of the things that was kind of a turnoff for a lot of people is, I mean, some people just hear the words musical theater and they go,
Hmm.
"No, I'm not doing that."
Yeah.
You
To
know?
the point where I like advertise like this. We've saw it so many times this past year. They do not put the fact that these movies are musicals in the trailers anymore. It's
Yes.
insane. You know, you saw it with Mean Girls, you saw it with Cicero, you saw it with fucking Wicked, which made $1 billion or whatever the fuck it made. And it was like, that is like the most famous musical, arguably, of the past 20, 30 years, maybe of all time. And it's just like, oh no, we're not going to put the fact that this is a musical in this highly successful musical adaptation where they're trying to trick everyone. And it's like become a thing where it's like now it's like people like me on podcasts make fun of that. That's what all the theaters are doing. And it's just like it's insane to me.
Yeah, and it's something where that pattern of behavior of shying away from advertising that things are a musical, it's in place. It's ridiculous, especially and again in the case you brought up in Wicked. How the hell do you separate Wicked from it being musical theater when it's been one of the defining show and one of the most popular shows? There's like quite literally, I don't know if this is still the case, but there was a point in time where there literally wasn't a moment, there wasn't a second on earth where there wasn't a production of Wicked playing. Like that's the point of where it exists in the cultural zeitgeist. And yet they were still too afraid to brand it a musical. And yet that comes from a very real place of some people, again, just see the word musical and they immediately check out. They won't give it a chance. And I think that this really wasn't able to hide itself as what it was trying to be given the subject matter. You know, with Wicked, where it's like, oh, we're gonna revisit the Wizard of Oz from the perspective of, they can still market it as something divorced from the genre of musical theater. They can still wiggle their way out of that.
Yeah.
But with this, it's like when you Google who Johnathan Larson is, the center point of this, it's like you can't divorce him from the context of musical theater. You can't. That is entirely where his life and his art and his story exists. And so I think that was, I would argue that was a factor as well. And plus you marry Lin-Manuel Miranda, you put that on top, who again, you know, so tied to musical theater just in his cultural identity and his cultural zeitgeist, you know, where he exists. It's something where I think people saw those two things and went, I don't think that's for me, and wouldn't even, you know, give it a shot.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, and because I think you're completely right. It's like, because how do you even sell this movie without it being, because the fact that this is a musical is so in the DNA of every scene, and even if you did what you did with Wicked or these other movies where you cut out all of the songs from the trailer, it's all still like they would still just be talking about musical theater in every single scene. You can't. It's a musical about writing musicals. You know, there's no way to sell it as anything else.
Yeah.
And I think also the other thing too is that, and this is a problem that is not exclusive to this movie in their cultural relevance, is that it's a Netflix movie, right? It comes out on Netflix, and Netflix, unlike, Apple or something, who, I think Apple has had a lot more success with their original stuff, and I think it's because Apple actually, more than just because they both will do the same thing where they make these big awards pushes. They have these movies that are prestigious movies, and this is a year when not this movie, but Apple and Netflix went head to head with who's going to win Best Picture, and no streaming service had ever won Best Picture. They were very looked down upon before that, and ultimately Apple in Coda beat out A Power of the Dog, which was Netflix's big push. They were pushing a lot of stuff. But I think of while Coda's kind of disappeared, movies like Killers of the Flower Moon and other things that Apple has put out have not really disappeared to the extent that these Netflix movies have disappeared. And I think the big reason for that is they give them full theatrical releases. Netflix will be like, here's a short run to qualify for the awards,
to qualify for the Oscars, just to check that box so they can at least start an awards campaign. And there's something so deeply disappointing about that too, because I also, there's something, I don't know anything about music theory. I don't. I was always the dance captain when it came to musical theater. That's where I lived. I didn't live in the music space. And there's
and I lived in the acting space, so so me either.
And yet there's something where I don't need to be and I don't need to be a music buff to know and understand that Johnathan Larson knew how to write a song that
Mhm.
hits you, that gives you full body chills, that makes you want to cry. He knew how to work the fabric of it to make it feel like you've been punched in the chest. And I would have given anything to have experienced that in a full theater setting with full, surround sound speakers, Atmos. I obviously I'm a sound nerd, so I'm a little biased, but I would have loved for Johnathan Larson's music to have been given that space to play in, just to honor it.
Yeah, seeing this in like a Dolby theater or something. Oh my
Oh
god,
my god. Oh, and also shout out to the sound team on this because trying to mix sound edits and mixes for musicals are incredibly difficult to pull off. Shout out to that team. You did a great job.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
And
and it's just something that's so frustrating because you'll see Knives Out got like a 2-week incredibly limited run, and even that was like so hard for them to pull off. They just refuse to let these movies have the life they should in theaters because they're like, no, we're Netflix, we're trying to kill theaters, sort of. It's incredibly frustrating.
yeah, it is. And I mean, it's something where I don't quite know what to do about it.
Mhm.
And it's something where I'm glad to have seen it got picked up, like I mentioned at the top of the episode, that it had its moment on TikTok, especially
Mhm.
where people were recreating the dance from from the song Therapy in it. That was like the big moment. And like people were like 30-90 and, that kind of had its little moment. But on social media, those moments can literally last a few days. Things can be super big for a few days and then it just kind of passes over them. Again, everyone else moved on. It doesn't
Mhm.
have that same type of staying power. And so that's a double-edged sword. It had eyes on it in a very limited form for a moment. And then it moved on with the rest of that kind of internet life cycle. And that's why I also feel like it flies a little under the radar because it didn't have a chance to garner staying power. It wasn't given the venue to do so. It was appreciated for a moment in fragments, and then everyone moved on, which is incredibly disappointing. So we touched on it for a minute of the fact that they couldn't there was no getting around the fact that this was a musical. And one of
Mhm.
the things that makes me appreciate this more is they double down on this being a musical. They double down on the theater kid energy of it. They double down on it being big and over the top and theatrical. They double down on the references, they double down on the cameos, they double down on this is like, okay, if this isn't for the general public, we're gonna make it for the people who fucking love this medium, who
Mhm.
fucking love this art form. And there are so many. He Lin-Manuel Miranda packed in not only a cameo for himself, he loves a cheeky little cameo,
Yes. I was
but
like, "Oh." It was like
he
Alfred Hitchcock.
yeah, and it's something where he packed in so many Broadway people, so
Mm.
many
Yeah, yeah.
actors, so many people, and ultimately, there's something really incredible about that, about specifically, like you have a lot of actors and a lot of people like, Ramen de Jesus and Joshua Henry and Judy Kuhn and like the little blips in the diner like Andre de Shields and Philippa Sue and Joel Grey and Adam Pascal and Daphne Rubin Vega who were like in the original production of Rent, that in and of
Mhm.
itself of just having that acknowledgement. But one of my favorites things is that when he's discussing that original kind of workshop that he did where he played it for other like playwrights and composers and stuff like that, all the composers, all the people that were seen in the audience were actual Broadway composers. And there's something about these cameos don't feel gratuitous because it feels like a love letter to Broadway and the way that Johnathan Larson's work impacted every single one of these people and is a part of their
Mhm.
story. And because he is fundamentally a part of the American musical theater's story of the last 30 years. And so it, I didn't feel any of those cameos were gratuitous. I do have a favorite. So I need to ask you before I tell you which one was my favorite. Which was your favorite cameo?
I mean, we already brought it up, but I'm always a sucker for the director cheekily putting himself in. Like I mentioned,
Mhm.
whenever Hitchcock does it, you're always like, okay, because he was kind of the one who broke that mold. Like Scorsese will do it a lot. I love that Scorsese scene in Taxi Driver, and so
Yeah.
and it's always like, and since Lin-Manuel's an actor too, I feel like you can get a little more leeway with it, but he also doesn't like overdo it. It's one of those things. It's like, oh, hey, there he is. So
Mhm.
I liked that. And I also, like I mentioned, Bradley Whitford. I know that's more of than like a cameo, and I love seeing him kind of like Richard Kind and him play off each other. Richard Kind just doing the most Richard Kind is like, yes, I totally agreed with you.
Yeah.
Like I really love the two of them together. But I think Lynn was my favorite. How about you?
Okay, so this is going to be a deep cut. But again, it feels like Lin-Manuel Miranda wasn't just doing this for I'm just going to throw my friends in. It is nope,
Hmm.
this is for this Broadway community that is fundamentally has Johnathan Larson's thumbprints all over it. And
Hmm.
in that scene where again he's playing it for all those other composers and playwrights and they cut to all of these actual Broadway composers and playwrights. You want to talk about, again, seeing Johnathan Larson's thumbprint. He changed what could be played, what type of musical influences could affect a Broadway score. He brought rock,
Hmm.
he brought that over the top pop, and that has changed the landscape of musical theater to the point where pop and rock influences have really been dominant over the last, decade or two.
Yeah.
And so my favorite cameo, deep cut, in that audience is my personal favorite musical theater composer of today, which is Dave Malloy, who wrote probably most famous for writing Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, which I did see on Broadway,
Oh, very cool.
and who took a 70-page cut of War and Peace and decided, I'm going to write an electro-pop opera, an immersive electro-pop opera based off of that. And there is no moment or space for Dave Malloy to do that without Johnathan Larson as a precursor.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
talking about that direct line, talking about just how much he shaped the face of the American musical. There is no Dave Malloy without Johnathan Larson. And so I loved his inclusion. Again, selfishly, he's just my personal favorite. Ghost Quartet is my favorite musical of all time. And I'm gonna say that, and there's gonna be like two other people out there that's gonna be like, I know that musical. Yeah, it's so I loved that inclusion. Again, all of that felt like this movie feels like such a love letter to the medium of the musical. And by including so many people that came after Johnathan Larson that, have been shaping the especially the face of the American musical over the last 30 years since we lost Johnathan Larson, since he kind of made that seismic shift and opened up the doors for so many other stories and genres of music and so many other people to do the same. It's something
Mm.
where it doesn't matter the it feels like a love letter to that, and it feels like a love letter to I can't get through this movie without crying. I cry twice, always. I always cry at the very end when he starts playing Happy Birthday, and I always cry when he is in the piano in the park by himself singing Why, as he's reflecting on, again, those first moments where he first brushes with this genre of storytelling and this art form, and he knows in his bones that this is it. This is what I wanna do with the rest of my days, and I love it, and it's worth it, and that is such a that is at the core of every theater kid, no matter
Yes.
no matter what level of quote unquote success you've achieved, it all comes down to every single one of them have had that moment. Every single creative has had, anybody who's wanted to pursue any sort of art form, but especially theater, has had that moment. And I feel like this film is such a love letter to every single kid who's experienced that. no matter where they are, no matter where their life took them. It's a love letter to that moment. Um, yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't really feel like there are a lot of other films, especially musicals that, especially made in the last decade or so that have really loved the fact that it's a musical the way that this film loves the fact that it is a musical.
That's very true. It wears it on its sleeve. It
Yes.
so many of these musicals, for one reason or another, seem to be embarrassed that they're a musical, or they're just like, you know, they're musicals because they think it's an interesting, like, not to get too into it, but like, the whole thing with Emilia Perez and how people are like, that's not a good musical. Like, it's just a musical because it's a way to tell the story and it doesn't do a good job of it. Where it's like this, it takes the form of being a musical and does what only a musical can do, and Johnathan
Mhm.
Larson strove to do and did, and you see the ripple effects of his career touching all of these people and changing the industry. And it's not just the people that he directly influenced, but now it's the people that were influenced, the people that he influenced, and you
Yeah. The
see these.
dominoes that have
Mhm,
fallen.
exactly. And I think that's so profound in this movie. Like most people, I feel like know Rent on some level,
Mhm.
especially people of our age, because after the movie came out and everything. But a lot of people, maybe not, maybe more now because of the movie, but wouldn't know who Johnathan Larson is. And I'm glad, that this movie let him have his moment, in the sun. Yeah,
Absolutely. To reopen that book and to bring him back into the light, and to look back and recognize, I mentioned, dominoes falling. You're talking about the cascading effect that, that he had, and going back and acknowledging where that first domino fell.
yeah,
And you could tell that this was something that Lin-Manuel Miranda, it felt very passion project-y to me, in the best way, in the way of, he did it because of the love and respect that he has for Johnathan Larson, and what he owes Johnathan Larson as a writer and as a composer, and the way that he kind of paved the way for Lin-Manuel Miranda. I feel like this film very much was kind of paying back, and that bringing Johnathan Larson back into the cultural consciousness, 30 years after his passing.
yeah.
It felt very full circle in a way that, I don't know. I get I mentioned theater kids were so over the top. I'm so disgustingly sappy and sentimental, and I am self-aware, I know that, and that I am so sappy and sentimental about this film because it feels sappy and sentimental in the best ways.
Yeah, well, that's what I strive to do every episode of this podcast, is to take these movies that more people need to know about, need to watch, need to respect, and
Mhm.
and put some respect on those names. And hey, we got two theater majors here, or two
Woo!
theater kids on here, so we're gonna get sappy. Like that's the
Yeah,
way
that's
it's
just the
gonna
name of
go.
the game, and
Mhm.
again, this is I cannot beg you enough, if you are listening out there and you're like, "I'm not a theater kid," give this one a shot.
Yes.
Again, it's bigger than just the moment of Johnathan Larson, but it's also worth it to just know of his story, to also just experience Andrew Garfield's performance. Like, his performance, Johnathan Larson's sister said that seeing Andrew Garfield his performance was like having her brother back. Like, that
Yes.
is high praise,
Yeah.
and Andrew Garfield, I'm gonna steal you an Oscar. I will hand deliver it to you because you deserved it. You deserved it.
Yeah, yeah. Whatever you have to do. Also, side note: one of the greatest performances of last year was just Andrew Garfield's Chicken Shop Date. If anybody
Yes.
out there has not seen
It was
that,
my favorite rom-com of the last 5 years. Oh my god.
it really was. Oh my god, him and Amanda, just like the chemistry. Oh my gosh, like incredible. So just
Ugh.
please go out and watch that if you haven't already. But yeah, yeah. I think that's very very well put, Austin. That's great. Great point to leave our discussion on Tick Tick Boom. Unless you had any last things you wanted to get out, because I know this movie means a lot to you.
Let me see. Last thoughts. Just one again. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah,
Thank
of
you for
course.
matching my energy. Thank you for matching the theater kid energy. Thank you for
Oh
letting me
yeah,
unleash my theater kid energy on the masses.
brought it out
Um,
in me.
and
I
you
do
know,
have one more question for you, but it's not necessarily related to Tick Tick Boom. But
hit me with it.
okay, well, because in the past we've talked about tangentially Bob Dylan stuff before, and we of course kind of brought up music biopics, including talking about Walk the Line, which was the original one, not Walk Hard, was directed by James Mangold, and of course recently there was a Bob Dylan biopic,
Mm-hmm.
A Complete Unknown. I cannot have my Dylan expert on here without getting your opinions on A Complete Unknown. What did you think about that one? What did you think of Timmy C in that movie?
So, fun fact: I still haven't seen A Complete Unknown.
Oh wow, that is
Uh,
shocking,
I
shocking to me.
the reason I haven't seen A Complete Unknown, one, the last just like 2 months of my life have been very chaotic. Um,
Fair.
very, very busy. I haven't had much time to catch up on anything. I feel I'm like woefully behind on like a lot of Oscar films. I've pretty much just seen
Campfire season's back, and that means s'mores. But when you're at home treating yourself, take them over ice with Dunkin' S'mores Cold Brew Concentrate. And suddenly you're always treating yourself. The home with Dunkin' is where you want to be. Click or tap the banner to shop now.
So good, so good, so good.
New markdowns up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Fresh kicks, spring tops, new dresses. There's always a score.
I mean, the denim section is unreal.
Why do I rack? All the dresses.
I always find something amazing.
Head to your Nordstrom Rack store to find can't-miss deals on all the spring things. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
Wicked, Conclave, and oh my god, and like Dune Part 2 are the only Best Picture noms that I've seen. So I'm a bad film kid. I'm sorry. I admit it. I admit it live here on air.
I'll pardon you. You're good.
Thank you for the official pardon. I think for me, I was raised on, like you said, I'm very familiar with Dylan. I was raised a lot on so much of his, music and so much of his story, and also had like a hyperfixation on Bob Dylan when I was like 16. And I think it's something where I know so much of his story already, and there's so much there that like I know of the legendary situationship between him and Joan Baez. You could go listen to the music that contained all of that. There is so much there that I'm already familiar with that I don't know. I fear for, and maybe I'm wrong about this. If I am, anyone, you can absolutely feel free to call me out on it. I don't. Is this a Wikipedia biopic? Is there anything new about Bob Dylan that I would be given coming out of it?
Yeah, so what I'll say is I think that this is a movie that has great, like it's an incredibly well-made movie.
Oh, no doubts. No doubts about like the direction, the performances, the cinematography, the editing.
Exactly.
It's more of
all of that.
It's more of when I go into, if I'm going to invest my time in a musical biopic, am I going to get anything new that I couldn't already fucking learn off Wikipedia? Am I going to get any new insights?
And that's the thing. It's like I could have just read a Wikipedia article and find this out and all this stuff out. And even if it is a Wikipedia one, where it's like, okay, like I said, great performances, everybody's been raving about how good Ed Norton is. He's incredible. Boyd Holbrook, who has kind of been like James Mangold's muse in always like a fourth build role, is like really fucking good as Johnny Cash, which is weird because James Mangold made a Johnny Cash movie, and it's like Boyd Holbrook is kind of better than River Phoenix in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's greatly directed, good script and everything. But at the end of the day, I'm like, what was this movie trying to say other than like Bob Dylan is really famous and he did these things? And he's kind of an asshole. I think that was like the only thing I really took away from it.
I had a friend ask me literally last week, why haven't you seen it? And to put it more bluntly, I'm like, I already know that Bob Dylan is an asshole. Like,
Yes.
I know that he makes incredible music. Again, voice very much one of the most incredible songwriters we've ever had. And so much of his music is so from his core, from his lived experiences. It is so him vomiting his own feelings, his own lived experiences. You can track through his music. So it's like, I already know Bob Dylan's an asshole. I can listen through the back and forth of him and Joan Baez's songs to know, everything, to know what went down between them. That is the final boss of situationships. Jesus. And so it's just not something that has called to me. And again, the first time I came on this show, I was talking about one of my top 3 favorite movies of all time, Inside Llewyn Davis. And I feel like when it comes to the bigger questions of what does it mean to be an artist and, the things that we touched on here, do we have a theme here going of just like, not even musical biopics, but just like artists pursuing art?
Yeah,
And,
I guess so.
I guess that's our through line.
Yeah.
But those questions that we touched on here, that this movie does a good, Tick, Tick, Boom does a good job of making the question bigger than Johnathan Larson himself of what does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to pursue great art? What is the sacrifice? What is, what is greatness? What does that mean to you? What does that mean to the world? How is that contextualized? And I feel like there's already a great film that asks those questions. And it's Inside Llewyn Davis that asks those questions in the context of that cultural moment, of that cultural movement, of the folk movement of the 60s. Is that film was already made. It's Inside Llewyn Davis.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would completely agree. I think that Inside Llewyn Davis is a much more interesting film that tackles the same subject matter. It's a better Bob Dylan movie despite not being a Bob Dylan movie.
Despite Bob Dylan showing up for 5 seconds, at the very end, It, again, coming down to those, the deeper questions about those deeper questions of what it means to be an artist and create art, and all of those things. I think that Inside Llewyn Davis does such a good job of tackling that in the context of that cultural moment that I don't feel called to go see A Complete Unknown. I'm sorry, Timothée Chalamet. I'm sorry, James Mangold. Maybe I'll get around to it. This is no hate on. Am I coming off too hateful?
No, not at all. You're good. You're good.
It's no hate to anyone or anything, in that. It's just not. It's just not calling to me all that much. And
That's
maybe
fair.
once life slows down a little bit, I'll get around to it. But yeah, still at the moment of this recording, have not seen it.
Well, that is completely valid. I still have a couple Oscar winners to see as we're recording this. The Oscars have not happened yet. This episode will be out before when everyone knows what won Best Picture. But there's a couple things I still need to see. The Brutalist. I didn't actually even see Wicked yet. And then I think there's one more that I need to see. Oh, Amelia Perez, which I'm like probably not going to see. But yeah. So there's a lot of good movies this year, and that's not. I don't think that's necessarily one on the top of the list you need to see. Unlike Tick Tick Boom was the year that came out.
Exactly. The one that should have taken home an Oscar. I have like 3 Oscar gripes. That I take dead seriously. And again, this is Andrew Garfield not winning is one of them. At the very end in the credits, you actually see footage of Johnathan Larson performing Tick Tick Boom in the original monologue, that it was presented in. And it isn't until you see those clips of Johnathan Larson that you're like, oh my God, Andrew Garfield nailed it. Like, as you're watching it, you're like, oh wow, he's really great. He's doing, he's making you feel, he's really, living the character right down to his fingertips, top of his head to his toes. And you're like, wow, he's doing a really great job. And then you see the clips of Johnathan Larson and his movements and his expression, and you realize that Andrew Garfield nailed every single one of them. He's so embodied that man, as well as learned to sing and play piano. Like he was asked, hey, can you sing? And he was like, I can learn. And he did. And he did such a phenomenal job. And again, Andrew Garfield, I will be stealing an Oscar. I don't know where I'll steal it from, but that's for me to figure out. You don't worry about it. I'm getting you your Oscar.
That's a problem for another day, but we're gonna make sure that is rectified. So, whatever you need, I will be on this heist with you. All right.
That's my goal this Oscar season, is to get Andrew Garfield his Oscar for a movie that came out like 3.5 years ago.
Yes. It'll be Kendrick's too.
Perfect.
But yeah, Austin, thank you so much for coming on and getting me to talk about this movie. I had a blast. It's not one I would have even considered covering. So but once you said it, I was like, that makes sense. So I had a blast. Before you leave, what did you want to let the people know about yourself or any of the work or anything that you're doing?
I'm just grateful to be here, man. Again, I always have such a good time here with you. Thank you for letting me just kind of word vomit and ramble about movies that I love. It's such a joy to get to do that with you. So yeah, I have nothing to really plug here other than thank you for having me. Thank you for listening to the episode. Thank you for making a space where we can just talk about movies that we love. I think that's an important thing, and I really love talking movies with you.
Likewise, thank you. I like I said, I always have a blast when you come on. I love people that are just as passionate about me, about movies and musical theater and all of these things. So I'm glad you see what I'm trying to do with creating this space and help me create it and bring it to more people. So thank you again for being on, and to all the listeners, thank you guys for listening. It means the world to me. This is this is a podcast, is a labor of love, and if you like this, if you want to hear some more of it, I do a couple other things as well. Check out the other podcast that I do, which comes out on opposite Mondays of this, where I'm the co-host of the Midnight Film Society that my friend Damien hosts. He's been on the show a few times as well. So definitely check this out. If you want even more, you can check out the Patreon for the show, Underrated Disc 2, which there's options for as low as $1 a month. Got my buddy JMO just signed up. Thank you guys for signing up over on the Patreon, and just starting a new Patreon podcast, which I've already got you slated to be on an episode, Austin. It's called Across the Second Dimension, where we talk about films that were originally released in 2D or originally released in 3D, and talk about how they hold up in 2D. So very excited for your and Mine episode. It's going to be a unique one.
We're going to have a good time. We always do. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. And then if anybody out there is in the Southern California area and you are planning to go to WonderCon, or even if you're not, I am going to be hosting a panel there. I can't say when it is yet, thank you, but it's going to be on the death of the mid-budget movie, something I have talked about quite a bit on this podcast. So I've got a really great group of panelists together, so we're very excited to talk about that. So if you're at WonderCon, we'd love you to come out and say hi, get a one-day ticket, or just come around and check out the panel, because I think we're going to be having a really good time with it. I got some people who are knowledgeable about movies and having some great things to say, so I'm really, really looking forward to that. WonderCon just coming up here in Anaheim at the end of March. So check that out. One more time, thank you, Austin, and thank you, everyone, for listening.